racial attitudes shape patterns of behavior, economic classes, and the political power in a nation, creating injustices for some and advantages for others. Yet the feelings and assumptions that spring to mind whenever an individual recognizes accents or skin color are not the invention of that individual, but rather the product of his culture shaped over centuries. In the United States, that inherited culture is largely British, taking root in the American colonies and continuing to influence American attitudes today. However, English writers offered several differing views to choose from. The anti-black view that depicted Negroes as dangerous and ignorant creatures. The middle view that saw blacks as inferior beings, but useful laborers. And the idealists who patronized blacks as noble savages. Of these three, only the middle view gained prominence in the New World, and this was due in part to the novels by Daniel Defoe. Although historians such as Winthrop Jordan comment on the influence of Shakespeare's Othello and Aphra Behn's novel, The Royal Slave, Jordan makes no mention of Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, Colonel Jack, or Captain Singleton. Yet Defoe was an immensely popular author who deliberately set out to shape the values of his English readers about slavery and colonialism. Defoe charted the middle path between the liberal and conservative extremes of his day to achieve a greater influence on English and colonial attitudes about race relations. Defoe's influence on readers reached a new height with Robinson Crusoe, which went through 4 printings in its first year. In a matter of decades, it reached as wide an audience as any book written in English. Naturally, books printed in England were also sold in America, but Philadelphia printer Robert Bell issued his own edition of Robinson Crusoe in 1768. Edgar Allan Poe, who was reared in the South, observed in 1836 that Robinson Crusoe had become a household thing in nearly every family in Christendom. Clearly, Defoe was an important influencer in the New World. One of the extreme viewpoints that Defoe opposed was the anti-black view represented by Sir Richard Blackmore. Blackmore said in The Nature of Man, a poem in 3 books, that Negroes were a degenerate race abandoned by God. Only in temperate zones can culture and true religion flourish. In the tropics, the sun's rays overheat the animal spirits, causing them to circulate too rapidly. This leads to the uncontrollable sway of passions. Marion Burgon accounts for this stereotype of the black's animalistic nature by saying that since Negroes and chimpanzees were discovered in Africa at the same time, some confused Europeans thought of the Negro as the ape man. In addition, some whites equated the African's nudity and polygamy with promiscuity. At the other extreme were idealists who patronized the black man as the noble savage. Many authors, admiring nature rather than man-made society, felt that the native man was more noble than the European man because he was closer to nature and had not been corrupted by society. Joseph Addison wrote in The Spectator in 1711 that the uneducated soul is like marble in a quarry, awaiting the touch of the skillful polisher to bring out its inherent beauty. This savage greatness of soul, if properly guided, can rise to great heights. In The Royal Slave, published in 1688, Aphra Behn declares that the Africans understand no vice or cunning, but when they are taught by the white man. And she defends the natives' nudity. If one lives forever among them, there is not to be seen an indecent action or glance. Behn goes on to portray her African prince in very idealistic terms. In his novel Captain Singleton, published in 1720, Defoe depicts the Africans whom Singleton meets as superstitious and ignorant. When one of the Europeans fires a gun at a leopard, several of the Negroes fell down as if they had been shot. Others fell on their knees and lifted up their hands to us. Whether to worship us or to pray us not to kill them, we do not know. One group of Negroes tells another story that the Europeans came from the sun and could kill them all and make them alive again if they pleased. In the immensely popular novel Robinson Crusoe, published in 1719, Crusoe takes upon himself the task of clothing Friday, as if Friday were a 10-year-old child. I made him a jerkin of goat skin, and I gave him a cap, which I had made of a hare skin. And Friday was mighty well pleased to see himself almost as well clothed as his master. Friday is a Caribbee Indian, not an African, yet his dark skin determined his status in the eyes of the Englishman. There is little doubt that Defoe believed in the intellectual superiority of Europeans. Crusoe's technological inventions, which are superior to anything that Friday or the other natives invent, demonstrate this point. Colonel Jack's successful manipulation of the black man, Mouchet, in the novel Colonel Jack, also supports this point. Defoe recognizes that blacks have some intelligence, but does not place their intelligence on the same plane as European intelligence. Colonel Jack states, "It appears that Negroes were to be reasoned into things as well as other people, and it was by thus managing their reason that most of the work was done." Singleton, like Crusoe, is thankful to be English and pities the Negroes. Yet the dark races excel at physical tasks. Friday's athleticism amazes Crusoe. Friday runs with incredible swiftness and impresses Crusoe by swimming the castle channel in about 30 strokes. Moreover, Mouchet and Friday enjoy serving their white masters and are very loyal to them. Friday would even prefer to die rather than be sent away by Crusoe. In contrast to these examples, Defoe praises the Englishman's love of freedom. In his essay, The True-Born Englishman, he writes, "For Englishmen do all subjugation hate." In the Review of 1711, he told of liberated slaves in the West Indies who were unable to support themselves and begged their masters to take them back. Defoe concluded that liberty is like a diamond lying in the earth. It is of no value except to them that understand it and know what to do with it. Defoe and many of his contemporary Englishmen evidently felt that blacks didn't know what to do with freedom because of their inherent nature. The similarities between these racial views seen in Defoe's novels and racial views that became common in the American South are obvious. And while Defoe did not originate these ideas about race, he did help to popularize them. Defoe's underlying motive, of course, was financial gain. He recognized that fortunes could be made from slave-run plantations in the New World, and he set out deliberately to promote colonialism. Robinson Crusoe's Island is a model of colonialism with the Englishman Crusoe as the master and the darker man, Friday, as the slave. Crusoe even uses the words plantation and colony, and is explicit about his financial gain. In another novel, Moll Flanders is transported to Virginia as a convicted felon, but becomes wealthy by operating a plantation that uses slaves. Another fictional character, Captain Singleton, benefits from the sale of black slaves who are found on a ship drifting in the Atlantic. Clearly, economic pragmatism caused Defoe to plot the middle course between Blackmore's and Ben's opposing views, since dangerous and ignorant creatures are not useful for developing colonies, yet noble beings can be exploited. The novelist even goes so far as to explain how blacks are best managed so that they do not become too unruly. In Colonel Jack, the recalcitrant slave, Mouchet, is whipped and threatened with torture, and then told that the plantation owner has decided to spare him. The slave is so grateful that he becomes a docile, loyal slave to Jack and the owner. Previously, the slave would have killed the whites over him if he had had a gun, as he himself admits. The plantation owner had said of blacks that these fellows have no sense of gratitude. However, Jack's conditioning of Mouchet convinces the owner that blacks are capable of gratitude when the owner hears that Mouchet was willing to give his own life for Jack's. "Me hang for the poor master that beg him for me," the plantation owner declares. "Your method is certainly right, and I desire you may go on with it. For I desire nothing on this side of heaven more than to have all my Negroes serve me from principles of gratitude for my kindness to them." This method is preferable to chaining or whipping slaves. In the review, Defoe criticizes plantation owners who treat slaves cruelly. But Defoe's reason is not that cruelty itself is wrong, but that maiming slaves depletes the owner's stock and cuts down on productivity. Thus, Defoe reveals his cold economic regard for how black slaves could profit white plantation owners, and shows how these plantation owners might use the slaves' sense of gratitude to manipulate the slaves. Of course, there is unintentional irony in Defoe's novels, which the 20th century reader recognizes at once. Jack's kindness to Mouchette is merely not whipping him. Instead, Jack deceives Mouchette in order to manipulate him like a puppet. That the slave would be willing to die for his white master seems ridiculous, although there is no indication that Defoe recognizes it as ridiculous. Furthermore, Crusoe's presumption of giving Friday a name instead of asking what Friday is called offends any sensitive reader. Yet the novelist appears to believe that Crusoe is just being civilized. In competing against other writers to influence society's values, Defoe had an advantage in his Puritanism. Because Defoe wrote in the Puritan tradition of literature, he got straight to the point using clear wording and often focused on practical matters such as finances. In contrast, Ben leaned toward the Romantic tradition of literature, which meant using fancy language and being more idealistic while ignoring materialism. Both writers were widely read, but Englishmen and American colonists rejected Ben's view of the noble African in favor of Defoe's view of people of color because of ethnic pride. Judging the dark race to be superior to the white race was objectionable to the English, and because of the economic advantage of the slave trade. Another important point is that Defoe is clearly the superior storyteller. His rare talent as a writer helped to popularize the oppressive views on race, which were adopted in the American South.
When Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go.